Sixers coach Doc Rivers, guys, still getting questions about his old team. The Clippers' playoff collapse, still a matter of conversation. Last week on the All the Smoke podcast, Paul George was critical of his now former coach Doc Rivers and how he used Paul in the offense. So during a Sixers media availability this weekend, Doc responded, quote, "Hey, listen, I enjoyed coaching him, so not a lot to say there. Ty Lue was sitting right next to me, so he better hope it's not adjustments. It's not going to be much different. Listen, we lost the game, and I think everybody needs to take ownership. Obviously, we can always do better. Players can play better. So as far as I'm concerned, I'll leave it there." Coach to coach, my friend. Fizz, what is your takeaway from Doc's words?
Okay.
Oh, no, I thought Doc handled it perfectly. You don't want to go down that rabbit hole of back and forth banter about whose fault it was and blaming each other and all that stuff. And he's right. When you lose, it's everybody. Obviously, the coach he's got that volatile gig that is often, the one that takes the scrutiny. But ultimately, everybody had a hand in going down, losing a 3-1 lead. So let's just be real about that part of it. And I think that it's important when you're a player and you're upset about how you're being used in the moment. It's a two-way street when it comes to conversation. You got to go to the coach's office and say, hey, how can we make this better? I remember Julius Randle walking into my office when we were really struggling trying to get him, to really unleash. And he came to talk to me, and we talked about how we can get him playing better basketball and how we could work together on that. It's not always the coach having to go to the player. So I just think it's not a good look for Paul George doing this publicly and putting blame just on Doc. I think that's better off said behind closed doors.
Yeah, look, Rach, when Paul made those comments last week, I think a lot of people took the stuff he said about adjustments and coaching to be the main thing. But I actually think more of what was important here is how he talked about how he was used. He said, I was used like J.J. Redick or Ray Allen. It was all pin downs. And I know that was a constant source of frustration for Paul last year. Now, when the people who do statistical analysis broke that down, it actually wasn't right. It reminded me a little of Dwight Howard when he played for the Lakers, and he said, like, I just, I need to, I don't like to just run pick and roll, et cetera.
Right.
And it turned out, like, when you check the stats, it's like totally not how he was used at all. But every scout I talked to, when I would say, what's going on with Paul? Like, what do you see there? The scouts who watched the Clippers play had the same opinion, which is Paul's not getting the spots and in the way that he was comfortable getting it in years past. Now, some of that's on Paul. Like, hey, you're on a different team, you're going to get the ball in a different way. Mm-hmm. But I actually think more of that is just on the idea that the Clippers did not have a true point guard on that team to organize the offense, and they still don't, frankly. And, a lot of that fell on Kawhi Leonard. A lot of that fell on just the system they were running. But they're going to have to figure that out because Paul's not comfortable in the offense that they were running last year and in the ways he was being used. And whether the statistics bear that out or not, I trust the scouts who watch them play and say, get your guy comfortable. And I think for Paul, like, if he had it to do over again, probably wouldn't have taken a shot at Doc because you don't want to take shots when the enduring image of you is hitting the side of the backboard.
Yep.
Yeah, and I piggyback that, Ramona. You need a guard or a player on the floor that understands game flow and when a guy's not engaged in the game and what he needs. And they don't have that right now. That's what makes LeBron so great is because he knows the flow of the game. I don't know how many times he came to the bench and said, hey, we got to get D-Wade a layup. We got to get Chris Bosh an open shot. We got to get Ray Allen a shot. He understood that as a player, so it never fell all on Spo to figure out how to get a guy going. They collectively did it, and he was the catalyst of that. And I don't know if they have that working for their team right now. And for PG, man, I would say stay quiet, grind, do your job. You got some baggage from other teams. Right now, Doc's a guy that's a championship coach. I would stay totally away from that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I want to move on to another former Clipper, Montrezl Harrell, the sixth man of the year, has switched locker rooms right down the hallway, Ramona. Another chapter to the ongoing LA rivalry. Yesterday, he was asked about new teammate LeBron James. Take a listen to what he had to say.
I definitely think his leadership is a tremendous skill to have. Talking to guys, putting guys in the right places, knowing what coach wants us and where he wants us. So I think we have a strong, great leader in LeBron. Not only him, AD, Mark, guy who's been around the league as well, man. So I think we just got great leadership in the locker room overall.
Great leadership in the locker room. Great leadership in the locker room. The Lakers and Clippers open their preseason against each other on Friday. They also open the season against each other. Ramona, do you read anything into those great leadership in the locker room comments?
Oh, yeah. Like that. Look, that was the one thing the Clippers, like, I remember reporting on, their collapse after last year. And I, talked to a lot of people with the team, on the team, around the team. And there were two main criticisms, which was lack of leadership, on-court leadership specifically, and the lack of a point guard who would sort of set up that offense, et cetera. Now, when Trez says that, I think that's a shot at the former team that he was coming from, right? The Clippers, obviously, when you get 6 different answers about who the leader is, probably means you don't have a leader. Probably means you don't have that really strong leadership ability. And Rach, you and I have talked about this a lot with LeBron, and it's one of those intangibles that I don't think he gets enough credit for in terms of just leadership in that locker room, on that court. And when, last year we were always talking about LA, Clippers versus Lakers, and we looked at, Kawhi and Paul and AD and LeBron, and I always said, I'll take AD and LeBron just because I think they're the top two, in terms of the two of the top 5 players in the league. But I don't think we realized the leadership gap that the Lakers had over the other contenders. And I think when Trez points that out, that's definitely a side eye at the Clippers.
Yeah, but I also think that it's a tough position to be in. He played against LeBron. When you hear a guy talking the whole game, getting everybody in place a whole game, you can't help but to marvel at that as an opponent.
Yep.
And so now that he's with him and he's witnessing this team building that LeBron does on and off the court, it's something that he's never experienced. And it's kind of like when I compliment the Miami Heat culture, I'm not taking a shot at teams that I worked for after. It's hard, but people will take that as a shot at other teams' culture.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming sports and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.